This is the first meeting of the House Elections Constitutional Amendments and Intergovernmental Affairs Committee. Called to order. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Representative Bauman. Representative Branscombe. Here. Representative Camuel. Here. Representative Decker.
Present.
Representative Gooch. Here. Representative Herron.
Here.
Representative Hodgson. Here. Representative Imes.
Here.
Representative Cook. Here. Representative Lewis.
Here.
Representative Lockett.
Here.
Representative Moser.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Here. Representative Callaway.
Here.
Representative Bratcher.
Here. Thank you. Before we get started, please put your phone on mute, and when you talk on the microphone, make sure the green light is on. Are there any members here that have special guests they'd like to recognize?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like the group to welcome my new intern, Lori Abbott. She's from Wayne County.
Where you at, Lori?
Lori goes to Eastern Kentucky University. She is a multiple-time award-winning writer by the Kentucky Press Association. So if you could welcome her, we're
Great.
excited to have her.
She goes to EKU? you
She
said?
does.
Okay,
Right on.
great. Representative Moser.
I would like to take this opportunity to also welcome my intern, Kyla, from Northern Kentucky University. She is hoping to go to law school in the future and is studying political science.
Welcome. Give her a hand. Anyone else? Okay, we have 3 new members. One's not here. Representative I say Bowman, he gets mad, it's Bauman. So, and then Matt Lockett, the Representative Lockett's here. And then we have a new member to the legislature, Representative Camuel. Would you like to say a few words? Okay. First on the agenda, we have Secretary of State Michael Adams. He's going to give us a review of all things Secretary of State. And Jenny, so just introduce yourself and Jenny, and then the floor is yours, sir. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm Secretary of State Michael Adams, and this is my Deputy Secretary, Jenny Scutchfield. Thank you. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks for letting me speak to you today about the state of Kentucky's elections and my recommendations to you for this legislative session. First, let me thank you for being good partners. Over the last 4 years, our Commonwealth has received attention and praise nationally and even internationally for how we conduct our elections. You deserve a great deal of the credit for that, for 2 reasons. One, you have worked well with me and my staff and with each other across party lines in good faith and in pursuit of common goals of voter access and election integrity. 2, unlike legislators in some other states, you have acted rationally and have been driven by facts rather than outlandish conspiracy theories. My first request of you is to not go backwards. It would be catastrophic going into a presidential election with very high turnout anticipated to take away 3 of our 4 voting days. It will be challenge enough to shoehorn an expected 2 million voters into 4 days. I don't know how we would fit this many voters into just 1 day without major problems. Beyond defending our gains, we can continue to improve the election process. In the last biennial budget, you were generous in allocating higher base funding for elections, plus a specific appropriation for upgrading election equipment. Thanks to you, this past November, every single vote in Kentucky was cast on a paper ballot. I found that regardless where a voter falls on the political spectrum, voters love and trust paper ballots. By eliminating electronic voting machines and transitioning to paper ballots, You've given Kentucky the best of both worlds, the speed of a quick count and the security of a paper trail. How can we improve the voting experience in 2024? I'd say the most important thing you can do is align this increased funding with performance. Let me give you an example. In November of 2022, during an election with everything on the ballot, from U.S. Senate to U.S. House to General Assembly to county offices to municipal offices to judgeships at every level to 2 constitutional amendments, Carroll County, with 11 precincts, closed 10 precincts and gave its voters only one place to vote in the entire county. The following week, the county got a check from you in an amount based on its number of precincts. We shouldn't pay the counties for voting locations that they don't open. We should alter the funding formula that allocates funding by precinct and base these allocations on number of registered voters. This would remove the incentive to inflate the number of precincts, close the polls, and take the check. There is more we can do on election integrity as well. Kentucky runs clean elections. On the rare occasion that there is cheating, it is caught and prosecuted. Asking for additional measures is not a concession that our elections are not secure. But we do need to make constant improvements just to keep up with the state of play. Let me give you an example. Kentucky, pursuant to a federal court order, has belonged to the Electronic Registration Information Center, or ERIC, since before I took office. We have used ERIC membership to improve election integrity in 2 ways. One, it has enabled states to trade information on what voters have moved elsewhere and re-registered elsewhere, so we don't have double voting. 2, ERIC has gotten access to federal databases, such as the Social Security Master Death Index, and shared those with member states. Since I took office, we have removed over 350,000 inactive voters who have moved away, passed away, or been put away. We have 3.5 million registered voters, so that's about 10% of the voter file, a massive proportion. My goal here is not for you to direct me to stay in ERIC or to quit. My goal here is to ask you to clearly authorize me in law to seek access to such information through other methods, such as direct agreements with federal agencies and with other state election officials. Unfortunately, ERIC has been politicized, and we need a plan B in order to get information from states that have quit their membership. Most of the ingress to and egress from Kentucky comes from and goes to our surrounding states, plus Florida and Texas. Florida, Texas, Missouri, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, and Indiana have all recently quit ERIC or haven't been members of it. So I need a clearly authorized way to get information from them, as I can't get it now through ERIC. None of my requests constitutes a major change in our election laws. I'm not a reactionary nor a liberal. I'm a conservative. Conservatives welcome change as long as it comes at a pace that society can process it. I'm proud of the reforms we've made together to our election process. I believe we should give our voters time to acclimate to these major changes before we make more. On the whole, I think we're in a pretty good place. Thank you, and I welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you, Secretary Adams. Appreciate that. And Representative Branscombe.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Are there other systems out there, databases that states are using besides ERIC that you've seen?
There's not really an alternative per se. There's no other, say, ERIC-like organization. ERIC is a multi-state partnership. There's no new partnership of that sort that's generated with the decline of ERIC. And so really the only way to fill the gap and to replace what we don't get anymore And by the way, we're paying more money for less information, right? Because our dues go up as other states get out. So I personally have not been part of the chorus of people that have cast aspersions that are false on Eric, but I'm also a realist, and I understand that we're paying more and getting less, and only one of our surrounding states is part of this partnership and sharing information. So that's why I've asked for a couple of things. One is the ability for us to be able to go directly to federal bureaucracies that have more real-time information, and the other is to be able to work more directly with other state secretaries of state and state election directors to do bilateral agreements with them. Let me give you a statistic that's really interesting. And again, this was through Eric, but Eric isn't necessary for this to have happened. We had a month not too long ago. We took 10,000 dead voters off our rolls in just a month. And they weren't Kentuckians who lived in Kentucky. These were people that were in Florida. And the way that we got that was, and it took time, but eventually we got it indirectly. Florida told Social Security, and Social Security told Eric, and then Eric told us. I'd love just to go directly, though, to Florida and go directly to Social Security, because I think that we can do those things in more real time if we have those direct access agreements.
Yeah, the reason I asked, with the number of states around us that are leaving Eric, or, we'll be getting less information from those states, and so that's why I was wondering, was there any other systems out there that might be able to join up with?
Rep. Branscombe, there are some states that are doing trials with Experian, which tracks address changes because it's showing promise, but right now there's just trials.
Thank you, Chairman.
Can I add one more thing just real quick? I get this question all the time, and so this is kind of a good place to talk about this. Generally speaking, there are sorts of two classes of voters that we can learn about and take action on, but the forms of action are different. If someone is deceased, if somebody is judged mentally incompetent by a court, if someone is convicted of a felony offense, we can take action like that. But if people move away, we can't take immediate action. Under federal law, we have to go through a process, and I think you probably remember maybe about a year ago, State Board of Elections staff kind of walked you all through that process, so there's a good understanding of it. But essentially, it takes years to take action because federal law requires that those voters be contacted multiple times to make sure that they're not taken off in error. So all the things that I'm suggesting here are all fully in compliance with federal law. But we need to get the information before we can even start that process.
Representative Hodgson.
Yes, that's a good segue into my question. First off, I do fully support your idea to go after a Plan B. We've got to have something besides Eric, and we need that sooner rather than later. But you mentioned previously about funding per voter. Would that be active voters only or just registered voters? Because it would kind of create a perverse incentive to keep voters on the roll that are inactive if funding were tied to it.
That's a great question. I don't have model language to give you today. I'm happy to work with you on that. So election funding is in separate streams in different parts of the budget and different parts of the statute. There is a statute that provides for base funding in the form of per registered voter, but the statute doesn't say whether they're active or inactive voter. It just says registered voter. So if you want to follow that model, you certainly can. If you want to tighten it up and say registered active voter, you can do that as well. I think I probably want to hear what the clerks had to say and the board, but especially the clerks, because there are some counties that have more inactive voters than others, and so they'd be in a position to lose out on funding potentially. So I'll certainly welcome their voice on that issue, but I think it would be pretty easy to write the law to pivot the funding stream a little bit, at least where we're not rewarding an inflated number of precincts and paying essentially for locations that don't exist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Secretary, is Eric still required by consent decree?
Yes, right now it is for us. That expires in 2025. I have reason to believe that the court won't extend that. It has extended it once before. we've made such great progress in coming into compliance with the law and getting our rolls made accurate and current that I have reason to believe the court will be satisfied and give us the option just through expiration of that consent decree next year. So what I'm suggesting today is not that we address staying on a permanent basis. I think Eric is probably going to have challenges staying open for a long period of time. I think the immediate need for us is just to have an infrastructure in place to, number one, allow us to get information that we're not getting through Eric right now because of the decline of Eric, but also, number two, to have something in place in case Eric does collapse of its own issues.
Vice Chair Callaway.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming
Yes,
and
sir.
the information. I have a couple questions. My first question, you had made reference to that as a state we prosecute in regard to people that would bypass our laws in elections. Do you have any examples of that in recent history, maybe that you could share with us? My second question, well, I'll get that one first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I do. I'm really glad that you asked that. And I try to convey this anytime that I can. There are people in politics that say that vote fraud is totally a myth, never happens. And then there are people that are highly irresponsible, and they say that it's happening everywhere and it's pervasive and the elections are all rigged. Those people are all wrong. And the truth, as in most situations, is really in the middle, which is it's rare, but it does happen. And when it happens, it's caught and it's prosecuted. The Attorney General's office, Cameron's office at the time, brought charges and has already secured some pleas. And there's a trial scheduled, I believe, for the others in Monroe County. And this is an important point, I think. When you have vote fraud in Kentucky, at least, it usually isn't a primary, and it usually is for local office. And so it's not really Democrats cheating against Republicans or Republicans cheating against Democrats. It's Republicans cheating other Republicans or Democrats cheating other Democrats. If you look at the approximately 30 prosecutions of vote fraud and attempted vote fraud in the last 25 years in Kentucky, almost every single one of them is in the context of a primary election. And that is for a few reasons. One of them is typically it's for a local office. And so you've got local offices at the county level, the city level. They've got patronage. Whoever wins gets contract power, gets to appoint people to jobs. The turnout's lower in a primary, usually half or even less than that in a primary vote is in a general. And what that means is it takes fewer votes to change the outcome, right? And typically it's poor counties where you see this because vote buying is a lot more effective in a place with high poverty. And so the places that you've seen vote buying prosecutions, Monroe County, Floyd County, Magoffin County, Clay County, that's where you tend to see this. So the case I was just referencing was brought in Monroe County. This was a Republican primary for a jailer. And that kind of illustrates the examples I just offered of it's a local office, it's in a small place, it's a position where there's patronage, and it's a low turnout situation because it's a primary election. This is the primary of 2022. Part of how these things get caught is actually early voting really helps because it makes these people that attempt to buy votes have to do it over a longer period of time and they have more exposure. So I actually think the early voting is helping us uproot this stuff. But regardless, what you've seen even before the early voting law is, again, in these other counties, Clay, Magoffin, et cetera, it's poor places where there's a local office that has patrons on the ballot. In a general election, you've got a red team and a blue team, and they're doing turnout. In a primary, it's a personality contest. And so it's getting my person in versus your person in, and it's a lower turnout environment. It's just a perfect storm. But we're not seeing this happening in a pervasive manner. It's one-off things, and fortunately, the Attorney General's office does a great job spotting those things. We have a task force. It's something that I inherited from my predecessor. We've kept it. I meet before and after every election with the Attorney General, with State Board of Elections, with state police, with federal prosecutors, and we look at everything. We talk about where there's leads, potential issues, and then we get together after the election and we trade notes. And just to close, and I'll let you answer ask your next question. The upgrades that we've made to our infrastructure recently have been helpful with this. For example, now that we have a portal to request an absentee ballot, we can track these at the state level in a way that we couldn't before. The Secretary of State before me had no way to know how many absentee ballots were requested, who requested them, where they were floating around. Not her fault. It's just our laws and our processes had not kept up to this reality. We have a very de minimis part of our voter population that uses absentee ballots, but we still need to track them because those are the ballots that, all things being equal, just don't have the same level of scrutiny from the election officials as other votes being cast.
And my next question is, just with the recent removals from the voter roll, where do you believe that we are at in regard to accuracy currently right now?
Well, I think we're essentially current with the information that we have. I don't think there's anything more that we can do at this time based on the information that we have. I do want to go get more information. I do want to reach the states that aren't in ERIC. I do want to get more real-time information from federal agencies. There are by federal law windows during which we are allowed and not allowed to do a mass removal of voters. We can take people off who are dead basically any time. We can take off people who are incompetent, judgmentally incompetent by a court. Felons, those folks, we can take them off. But these mass mailings of to hundreds of thousands of people that used to live here and they moved, those take time, and specifically they take information for us to know those things. So we're not caught up on that. I think we're about as caught up as we can be under the state of the law with the information that we have. But you'll see, I think you'll see the Board of Elections in the next year after this presidential election, when the window is open, I presume that they'll propose another purge. It will probably be 6 figures, and that's appropriate. That's what we were supposed to be doing in the prior decade.
Representative Moser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks so much for your update. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing to strengthen our election laws.
Thank you.
I'm amazed at the amount of work that you've undertaken in the last 4 years, and very impressed with how our elections are being held. Back to the voter roll cleanup. It sounds like, as Eric is phased out, that you're kind of building a plan to coordinate efforts to collect information from other states and federal agencies. But what exactly do you need from the legislature to authorize that data collection?
Well, I'm happy to offer some specific language to you all. And to be clear, I don't think I necessarily have to get that language enacted to be able to take some action. But what I would like to prevent is litigation over my ability to do common sense things to make sure our rolls are accurate. I get threatening letters, not in that sense of the word, but I get litigation threat letters from left-leaning organizations that say, we don't like what you're doing, taking these people off the rolls, and we're going to sue you. And it hasn't happened yet, but I think it probably will at some point. I'd like to curtail our exposure on that by just having clear authorization that, of course, we want the Secretary of State to be able to make sure these rolls are accurate and to be able to work with other state election officials and with federal agencies.
Okay. All right. Well, let us know how we can help.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think as the human race keeps moving through time and this technology around us, it's just people are suspect of technology. I think that drives so much of the conspiratorial thinking. And got AI now, and but thank you, sir. Appreciate that. We have no more questions, and appreciate your job. Congratulations on your recent reelection.
It's great to be back.
Good for 4 more years.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're waiting for a international hero, I guess, to come on Zoom, but he's not online just yet. So we'll skip and go on to John Hodgson. He's going to have a discussion on a couple of his bills, or one. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Hodgson, State Representative, District 36. I want to speak to you about what has bill that has been filed that we want to have some discussion on. Joining me here at the table, I'll let my guests introduce themselves.
Good morning. I'm Tabitha Clemens, Grant County Clerk and President of the Kentucky County Clerks Association. Good to be with you today.
I'm Jason Denny, the Anderson County Clerk and the current Treasurer of the County Clerks Association.
Okay. I asked Tabitha and Jason to join me because we've been working collaboratively on this bill for more than a year. We came to Interim Joint Committee this summer, and in background, as long as political office confers with it power and money, people are going to try to cheat. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be continuously evolving and continuously improving in our methods to catch and stop any cheating. So one of the areas that is of great concern to the general public right now is about the electronic equipment that is still involved in our elections, and that's even though we are voting on paper ballots, they are tabulated by a tabulator electronic machine. We have passed laws in this body to make it a felony to attach that tabulator to the internet. We have a pre-election certification of those tabulators. I've actually been in Jason's basement of his county clerk office where we have personally witnessed the certification process that goes on with those tabulators. What we lack in our process is something on the back end to verify that that tabulator performed correctly. The manufacturer has given testimony in this committee that their error rate is about 1 in a million. And as Ronald Reagan once said, we just need to trust but verify. So what we'd like to go through, and I believe you have a copy of the bill in your packet, it's House Bill 53, that in order to validate the accuracy and fidelity of the vote tabulation, we would have a process where the Attorney General or designee would select one tabulation machine in each of 120 counties and one race on that tabulator for what we're calling a hand-to-eye recount. Well, this process, which is defined in detail in the bill, mirrors a 1994 process that the court developed for doing hand recounts. I've participated in such court proceedings where you have two people seated at a table. In this case, it would be sworn-in qualified poll workers, one from opposite parties, and they would take the ballots, stack them as necessary, and look at them one at a time. They would each use their eyeballs, agree on what the marks were on the paper, and make a tally mark on their sheet. It's a fairly tedious process. You can count about 300 ballots an hour that way. But you go through that, compare the two counters' tally sheets at the end. If they match, you're good to go. If they don't match, there's been some kind of human error and you've got to do it again. This should be simple enough a third grader could do it. You're just interpreting the mark and you're counting them up. But this process would be witnessed by the public as well as filmed for the public to view remotely at some point. So once the hand-to-eye recount is completed, that total for that race on that tabulator would be compared to the tally tape that was printed out of that tabulator on election night and signed by the election officers. We know that that is a document that comes out about 6:30 or 7 o'clock. It can't be altered. It's got those signatures on it. So we're now going to compare the eyeball hand-eye recount with that tally tape and make sure the numbers are the same. If they are, then we have verified that our process is working correctly. If there's not, there has to be a little bit of investigation as to why. There are cases in Kentucky where, in fact, Representative Nemes has been involved in one where voters marked outside the readable area. Maybe they underlined a candidate's name or circled their name or circled the oval instead of filling it in. So in cases like that, we wouldn't be worried about it, but if there was a significant discrepancy between the eyeball recount and the tabulator that was not explainable by those things, the county clerk can investigate further, and the Attorney General would have the ability to submit findings to the grand jury for further investigation. The Attorney General's office in this case really would not have to do anything out in the counties. That selection process could be done via email in a process that they will describe. The county clerk would execute the task with certified election workers. They'd be paid at the local poll worker rate. Public could witness that, and we feel that this process does two things for us. One is that it replaces what we currently have in statute as a risk limiting audit that has proven very cumbersome. This one is not. It's simple, straightforward. I think everyone can understand it. And the second thing is it shows the public that in a random way across every county and every possible race, if someone has attempted to compromise these scanners and compromise the programs, we've got a safety net to catch it on the back end. It's not 100%, but it gives a pretty good statistical indication that the results are accurate, which we hope will reduce the interest in conducting challenges of election where the margin of victory was large just to check the technology, as we saw. We did have 6 of these recounts in the state in 2022. One was triggered by statute in Lexington. The other 5 were court ordered. They are time consuming, they're expensive, but none of them yielded results that were different than those reported on election night. So we hope that would be the case across the state. We get 120 counties that would do the hand-eye recount and everything would be good, and then we can increase the level of confidence in our voters. But if someone has somehow compromised a machine, this would give us an avenue to catch it. And that's what we want to do, a continuous process improvement here. Kentucky has risen in the rankings by the Heritage Foundation to number 14 nationwide in election integrity laws. We've got a couple more things to clean up to get even higher, and improving this audit process is one of them. So I would ask my colleagues here to weigh in on their perspective on this now.
Thank you, Representative Hodgson. We appreciate your sentiments about the bill. So the Kentucky County Clerks Association supports this legislation because we believe that this type of post-election audit will increase voter confidence in our elections by providing an opportunity to check the tech, as Representative Hodgkins puts it, before the election is certified. While we believe in our voting systems, and we have just heard all of the recounts come out just the way that we found on election night, we do feel that, you know, even with our manufacturers and our voting equipment here in Kentucky, not only being certified here in our state, but also following all of the federal security guidelines, and that they pass a series of logic and accuracy testing, not just on a federal or state level, but also on a local level before every single election. We know that a post-election audit can provide an extra sense of comfort and security for our voters, that they feel like their vote was counted accurately. The simplicity of this bill with the hand count, one randomly selected race from one randomly selected scanner in each county, perhaps is the greatest virtue of the bill. It's easy to explain to voters, and it is a simple process compared to what we've seen in the risk-limiting audits that have been piloted. The county clerks and the County Board of Elections, when implementing this, especially when Jason describes to you what took place in the risk-limiting audits for a county his size, but thinking about a county the size of Jefferson or Kenton or Warren, and the risk-limiting audit provides so many more obstacles and hurdles for us to overcome. One concern that we feel compelled to share is that as a standalone bill, it represents an unfunded mandate for county clerks and for our fiscal courts in every county. But we are working on increasing election funding for our counties in separate legislation. But we would be remiss if we didn't share that with you, that it would be an unfunded mandate as a standalone bill. In addition, if we adopt this post-election audit, clerks would like to see additional legislation to reduce the use of recounts, because we are doing this hand-to-eye recount in a select race, except in those races that are close, where we feel that it's absolutely necessary to do those recounts, or when there is evidence of issues with the election, like that's already been spoken about today. Regardless of these concerns, KCCA supports the legislation, and we look forward to sitting before you in a future committee meeting when the legislation is ready for a vote. Before turning it over to Jason to talk more about the risk-limiting audits, I'd like to thank Representative Hodgkins for working with us. We started really far apart a while back, and we found that by being collaborative and working together, legislation becomes better. right? We
Amen.
work to find a better solution for the Commonwealth. That's what the county clerks are here for. That's what we invite from all of our legislators, no matter if the bill's elections, motor vehicles, recordings. We've been working really diligently over the past several years to find ways to be solution oriented. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jason so he can tell you all about his risk limiting audit.
Thank you, Tabitha. And thank you, Representative Hodgkins. I've known Representative Hodgkins for several years, and he's been in my office numerous times to gather information, and I thank him for that. The risk limiting audit pilot program was put into place 2 years ago by legislation, and I was on the committee that helped come up with the guidelines for that, and actually was one of the 8 counties that participated in that risk limiting audit. In Anderson County, we have 28 of these scanners, these machines as they're talked about. Due to the number of scanners I have based on population and the way we do elections, 18 of my scanners were selected for a risk limiting audit, putting multiple hours into going through and performing this risk limiting audit, only to show the outcome was true within a percentage of margin of error, but we only sampled ballots out of each machine. This would simplify the process and count every ballot in one machine to show the tech. And I think that's all we're trying to do, is show that the machines are checking the ballots and counting the ballots accurately. We already certify the machines up front, just like we talked about. Each county clerk and their vendor set the machines and test the machines to show that every race would count ahead of time. And the boards of elections have to inspect these machines before we start. There's processes all the way through to the end. This would just shore up that group that believe that the machines aren't counting correctly. I've been a clerk for 16 years. I totally trust Kentucky's election process and the equipment we use, or I would be the first person vocally to speak out against it or resign if I didn't believe it was true and accurate. That's how I feel about our election process in Kentucky. So I really encourage this. This, to me, would show the general public an easier way to understand what this audit is about.
We have three questions, but would you want this in a perfect world? Are you saying you'd rather have this in lieu of the
To replace the risk limiting audit.
Good. Okay. Representative Raymond.
Thank you. I'm curious what this live stream might look like. Maybe it's done in other places, and we already know. But would the video be on poll workers' hands as they're counting these ballots? I ask because we've seen threats to poll workers across the country, and I'm wondering how you all think about ensuring the safety of people who are put forward in this position.
Okay, so the bill does require you to promulgate administrative regulations for how you do that. It's not necessarily a live stream. It would be recorded. Live streaming would be an option of the county clerk, but certainly a privacy concern there would be important. Probably just show the ballots in the hands would be the essential part, or some other way to not identify the folks.
Additionally, all of our meetings in County Board of Elections are open to the public. So one of the members of our board is the county sheriff. And during the year that the county sheriff is on the ballot, it's a designee from the sheriff that the board appoints. So I would, in my county, I'm going to schedule our County Board of Elections meeting at the same time as this is happening, so that the county board would be there and that we would have the additional security from the sheriff on site. I'm glad that you raised the question about, live stream or recorded. We had a bill a few election cycles ago that require us to keep our machines under surveillance, video surveillance. I would simply just use that feed and then try to position, where maybe their identity, their face isn't completely seen by the camera, but that the ballots would be seen. You're welcome.
I would like to add that in some offices where our current security equipment is for these machines might not be the place to perform this audit. So there could be additional cost for cameras and that type of technology to do this, to keep this safety.
Representative Callaway.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it, Representative Hodgins. I would had a couple questions. One is in regard to the unfunded mandate that you mentioned. Do we have an idea of what that funding would be? And then my second question is the Attorney General's role in this process is really reactionary, if I'm understanding that. If you could help me understand just what their role would be in regard to picking these machines, or if there was an issue found.
Okay, so first about the unfunded mandate, I do agree that this is going to consume some resources. Our experience in 2022 suggests that 2 people can hand count ballots at about 300 per hour. And we know the poll worker rate, it varies per county. I think in my county it's about $300 a piece. So at a minimum, you'd be paying 2 people for a day of poll work, plus providing the facility, which is probably existing county facilities. So in most situations, I would think this could be done for, $1,000, $2,000 per county per election cycle. But that's going to vary depending on the size of the county and how many ballots might be in that machine. Some of the consolidated centers might have 4,000 ballots in there. Some of the smaller precincts may just have 300, and you're done in an hour. But it is, I agree, an unfunded mandate, and I think we've got to address that in other bills. We need to increase the funds that are available for county clerks to administer these elections properly, because it is getting more expensive to pay the poll workers. It's getting more expensive to do the job, and we're having less people interested in doing that kind of work, and this is a cornerstone of our democracy. Moving on to your second question regarding the Attorney General, there are 2 roles. The Attorney General currently has an audit where they randomly pick 12 counties to go do a deep dive audit. That is not connected. It would continue. But the Attorney General has a neutral party who's outside the county and would erase any questions about home cooking with, a county clerk or a sheriff or someone in that county, would randomly select the serial number of that tabulator from a list provided by the clerk and randomly select a race on that, kind of like we do with the Kentucky lottery or the elk draw. It's somebody who's disinterested in the outcome would do that random selection. That could be done from the office purely by email. The Attorney General's office never has to travel to these counties. But on the back end, in the rare instance where there are findings, something looks like it's amiss or perhaps criminal, the Attorney General, as a law enforcement officer not connected to that county again, would have the authority to present findings to the grand jury to see if there has been a crime committed. And obviously it's a challenge in some of the counties because the county clerk is on the ballot every 4 years, the sheriff is on the ballot, and these are participants in the Board of Elections. And this would prevent any political maneuverings in these counties from taking place. The Attorney General is disinterested statewide official. But in my opinion, the cost to the Attorney General's office would be minimal, other than if they had to have a grand jury report and a prosecution related to something found.
Representative Branscombe.
Thank you, Chairman. Couple questions. So just so I can get this clear, this would be taking the place of the risk limit audits, correct? The Attorney General's audit that they do would still be in place, correct? Okay. The unfunded mandate that you talked about would be because we are broadening the audit now. It's not just specific to the risk limit audit. Is that correct?
I believe the risk limit audit is also an unfunded mandate.
Okay. All right. That was going to be my next question. One question I had was on the voter discrepancies with the voter intent markings. How would that process work? I've kind of read through it in the bill here, but can you kind of walk me through how that would take place on, I guess, agreeing that what the voters' intent on the markings would be?
My understanding, talking to Representative Hodgins, is this is a check the tech. So if a ballot was overmarked, we would set those ballots aside in a separate stack because those ballots would not have been, that race would not have been counted through the scanner. So we would set those ballots aside to check the tech to be sure the scanners counted exactly what we see by the rules of the scanner.
Okay.
And
So-
just to follow up for those who may not understand the terminology of overvote, it means that if there's two people on, in that race, someone is marked both spots, whether that was intentionally or unintentionally. Even a prick of a pin can be considered a mark. When the ballot is put into the machine, there's an indicator. It will kick the ballot back out. It will appear on the screen that it was overvoted. The voter then has the opportunity to spoil their ballot with an election officer, and that gets marked in the electronic poll book that they've spoiled their ballot. They get issued a new ballot and they can vote. Or they can cast it as is. That's how those go in. Is a lot of voters are in a hurry. It didn't really matter to them about that race anyways. They just voted because there was a box. They press over, cast my ballot, and it goes in the machine. So I just want to be clear so that if anybody has questions.
So those would be set to the side.
Correct.
And as is means they know it tells them that race would not count. So it lets the voter make that decision ahead of time.
I would add to that. In a separate court proceeding, let's say there was a challenge of election, you've got to recount every single ballot in a challenge of election. And in those cases, extraneous marks can become a factor in determining the outcome of the election. And that's actually changed some races in Kentucky because the court precedent says that if a voter marks their intent by circling a candidate's name, underlining their name, circling the oval in a way that the machine can interpret, that's still a lawful vote. So if you're doing a court-ordered contest of election, some of those marks would count and there would be a determination made. In this case, we are just checking the tech. We want to make sure that the machine counted the votes it was supposed to count.
What about Chads?
Glad to say Chad no longer works here.
I bet some youngsters don't know.
Dimple or hanging chads.
Yeah. Okay, thank you guys. I'm sorry, Representative Lockett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple questions. One, I see on the first page that it is the Attorney General and or a designee that would randomly select the scanner and the race. So they would do that in all 120 counties,
That's
correct? So would it be possible under this bill for someone to request a particular race be looked at?
Part of the bill requires the Attorney General to promulgate administrative regulations for how they would do that random selection. As a law enforcement agency, I suppose that's something that could be under their discretion to do that, but that's not really the intent to pick a questionable race or a close race. If they've got that kind of questions, I think it's a different kind of deep dive audit they should be looking at, because we're just making sure that the machine is counting votes correctly in a random sampling way.
And I would be very curious, especially since he is here, on the opinion of our Secretary of State on this bill. Support it? Okay, thank you.
And the Attorney General?
Due to the change of administrations and some of the changes in the bill, we've had a little confusion on what was contained in the bill, but I think it's safe to say they're not against it at this point, but they're making sure that they can meet the requirements here.
Did the committee sub satisfy them?
I did speak to the AG's office this morning, and I think they just need to do some more review to make sure they understand what's being required of them. But I don't think I don't personally see any barriers to their acceptance at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, clerks. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll see more of each other this session. Jennifer Decker is working on an elections bill. If any members have some input, go see her on all sides of the spectrum. Representative Timoney, your friend didn't show up, or he can't zoom in. He got kicked off.
Yes, Chairman. He is Senator Mark Daly from Ireland is the executive director, or he's the director of the Irish American Outreach Group here in the United States, and he's currently traveling from Omaha to South Dakota because part of his job is obviously facilitating relationships with American legislators. So I'd hoped for him to be able to be here today, just because he'd be way more entertaining than I would be. He's definitely a showman. But Chairman and committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to present House Resolution 35. It's a simple resolution. My name is Killian Timoney. I'm the state representative from the 45th District, and I have been designated the resident Irishman. House Resolution 35 is my annual St. Patrick's Day resolution. What we're doing this year is it's the 100th anniversary of the political relationship, the official political relationship between the United States and Ireland. 100 years ago in October, the first Irish ambassador was ever named by President Coolidge, and it was Timothy Smitty. And that marked the beginning of a very formal relationship between the United States and Ireland. I could go into details about how there are 10% of the American population traces their ancestry to Ireland in some capacity. I could go into those things, but I think some of the most recent occurrences in Ireland probably would be more beneficial. There are 1,000 U.S. companies currently residing in Ireland. And if you think the island is basically a little bit more than 300 miles from the southern tip to the northern tip. So if you look at it that way, if you put them in a straight line, there's 3 American companies per mile in Ireland. So there's clearly an economic relationship there. In the United States, there's about 650 Irish companies that are operating. And if you go specifically to the 45th District, you cannot ignore Pierce Lyons and Alltech. Pierce Lyons passed away a few years ago. Mark Lyons is now in charge of the family-owned company of Alltech, which exists in 19 different countries in the world. But this resolution is just to signify the relationship there of the United States and Ireland, and particularly, and those of you who play trivia, the first European to step foot in Kentucky was a gentleman by the name of James McBride in 1754, which was 15 years before Daniel Boone came in. He came in through the Ohio River and actually set up camp in Carrollton, Kentucky. So he then returned home to Ireland and talked about this beautiful place that looked just like Ireland, and it was Kentucky. So thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, do I hear a discussion?
Motion to adopt.
We have a motion from Representative Branscombe and a second from Representative Gooch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Representative Bauman, Representative Branscombe,
Aye.
Representative Callaway,
Yes.
Representative Camuel,
Yes.
Representative Decker,
Yes.
Representative Gooch,
Yes.
Representative Herron,
Yes.
Representative Hodgson, Representative Imes,
Yes.
Representative Cook, Representative Lewis,
Yes.
Representative Lockett,
Yes.
Representative Moser, Representative Raymond,
Yes.
Representative Bratcher.
Yes, the resolution passes with favorable expression. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
If no other business, we are adjourned.